Welcome back, everybody, to Unearned Confidence. This is Ben, and I'm here with Kyle.
Hello.
We today are doing something new in this episode 3, season 1, where we are doing an over-the-phone, or in this case, Skype interview with Gordon Chaffin from Washington, D.C. He's a public policy expert. In particular, he cares about electric transportation, bicycle transportation, public transportation in the form of buses and all that, but he's a wealth of knowledge, and we get to talk to him about all things today, from public transportation in Austin to the Boring Company and everything in between, EV scooters and so on. Gordon has his own subscription newsletter called Street Justice. What's that address?
That is streetjustice.news.
Streetjustice.news. We hope you like. So my wife and I went to Miami this past weekend to this fitness festival called Wadapalooza. And Miami, I didn't know this, but it looks like they've definitely embraced the e-scooter. I don't know if I want to call it a revolution yet or not, but it's definitely some sort of a paradigm shift. But so we go down, and everywhere in downtown Miami, there are these scooters. Some of them are stacked very neatly like dominoes. Others are hanging in trees, literally being placed there by juveniles or drunks or whatever. but they're everywhere. And so we decide. My wife's never been on them. My son and I had been on them in Denver, but we got on them and rode, and it was exhilarating and fun and useful. Like, we could move at 15 to 20 miles an hour and get from our hotel, which was a couple miles away from the venue, to there without using an Uber or anything else. And it felt good. It felt exciting. And so, my wife felt the same way. She's never really ridden a motorcycle or anything like that, so that was kind of closest thing to that. It was a little bit sketch. We went over this 1-foot bridge, and I get to the apex of this footbridge on a scooter I picked up at the bottom of this thing. And I'm going down, and I realize there's no brakes. Like, the brake is dead. And so I had the wherewithal, fortunately, to drag my foot and not kill myself running into traffic. But good. Generally good, exciting, a little bit dangerous, kind of knew the danger. Then fast forward to, into the games. My wife and I go out for dinner, and we walk, strolling hand in hand, walking down the sidewalk. And these things would just go fucking blazing by, bam, and they're quiet, and they just scare the shit out of us. And we're not elderly, but it was disconcerting as all get out. It was not pleasant to be on the sidewalks with these really cool things. So first off, how do we deal with that? Because San Francisco just outright bans them. Some cities are really embracing them. Denver's somewhere in the middle. What do you have you thought about this? Do you think there is a solution where we can keep this cool tech, but make it friendly for the people that are on the sidewalks?
Yeah. So the primary problem with scooters from a public policy situation is that sidewalk danger. It is the unfortunate benefit of electric scooters is that they're quiet, and the reality is, so there was a theory that there's all this demand for small transportation, like you said, you don't want to use a car, you can just zoom over in it. It essentially replaces a long walk for an able-bodied person. There was a theory that we're going to create all this demand, or we're going to take advantage of all this demand by giving these vehicles into public space. And since it's going to be kind of chaotic, the policymakers are going to say, oh God, we need a dedicated space for these. We need to give them space to park. We need to give them safe places to ride, so that walking is separate from scooter riding, is separate from bicycling, is separate from driving. However, what happened was that politicians did what politicians do, which is react obtusely and short-sightedly to that sidewalk riding danger, and ban the technology, as you said, severely limit it with.
Do you remember Emily Hartridge? She's a famous YouTuber from the UK, and she was killed last summer in Great Britain. And I don't know if this affected policy, but it looks like now in the UK they're like just flat out banned. You can't have them, at least in the majority of London and elsewhere. But she definitely she was noted as being like, and it's unfortunate, a very lovely person with a huge following, and her death is tragic. But it illuminated for me the reactionary nature of our governments. But I don't know. Do we blame them, or do we just say, well, shit, I mean, these companies just dumped these onto us, knowing they're cool and everybody's going to want them, without really having created any policy themselves.
Yeah. So the difference is that Uber did the same thing, but the roads were like, we had 100 years of like policy that made roads safer. So adding marginal Toyota Camrys to the road wasn't chaotic.
And technically the drivers of those vehicles are still licensed. So they've gone through some form of training to do that, wherein I think, can't you just get on one of these scooters and go, basically, most places?
Yeah, when you launch the app first, you have to prove that you have a driver's license with a photo. But as we've seen in DC and other jurisdictions have seen, what happens is that you have a bunch of people download the app. One of them is a licensed driver, so they use the photo. They get their parents to do it, as is the case with 16 and 18-year minimums.
Gotcha.
Where are you at with like policy regarding safety on these things? Is that anything the government needs to be involved with, or do you have an opinion there?
Well, so the challenge is that you have to set good kind of broad-based guidelines, but if you depend too much on human enforcement, so your public works officers or your police officers, then it will not be enforced. So the biggest argument, and it comes from the cycling world, are helmet laws. The difference is that, okay, let's say your city sets up a bike share system. They have docks. They have bikes that you can undock and go to a different dock and then dock it. There's a decent way to fix that. Like, as soon as the people get a membership, you mail them a helmet. The challenge is that scooters are very high percentage last minute decisions. And so if people own helmets, they don't have them with them, and they may not own a helmet, and you can't physically, because the devices are so, it's a floorboard with a battery in it, 2 wheels, and a stick for a handlebar. There's no place to like put a helmet that can be reused.
Does the thought of consistency among jurisdictions play a role? Like for example, Miami pretty much, it just looks like, and I don't understand the policy, I haven't read it or anything like that, but just by way of aesthetics, what I see there is that they're fully embracing it, and there's not a lot of I didn't see anybody like cracking down on how you drive or where you drive or anything else like that. But then you've got, Denver that has some amount of regulation, and then on the other end of the extreme, you've got San Francisco, which is generally looked at as a city that embraces tech before anybody. They're just flat out saying, no, sir. So it seems like there should be some sort of coalition or governing body, or at least somebody that can lobby to a governing body that advocates for a set of controls, regulations that are consistent across the board. I mean, don't you think that would be helpful?
It would, and they kind of exist. The easiest comparison is motorcycle/moped law. In practice, what happens is that 50 different states develop 50 different rules. And so if you buy something like the new NGT, which is now being sold in America, how you register it, how you get title, insurance, whether you have to get a motorcycle endorsement, all of that stuff depends on state, even though there do exist local, state, and international like best practices bodies.
I think it's realistic to look to the scooter companies to like you're not allowed to operate in our city unless you decide to invest in the infrastructure to build places to park these things, maybe put some educational materials together to let the public know like how to operate them safely. I like that there's at least some kind of firewall where you have to show a driver's license. I realize it's easy to manipulate, but that seems like a good idea.
Yeah, so most cities, DC certainly, require community benefit programs or packages. And so a bunch of warning screens on the app that give best practices on how to be safe before, once you rent a scooter or like when you sign up. And a lot of community benefits, things like holding how to ride sessions, go to a high school parking lot. Yeah, be there for 4 hours. The whole community can come by. The problem is that, and this is true of transportation and lots of different fields, but the design of the system, the infrastructure is the most important thing. And with the physical world, it's so prohibitively expensive that that would be like saying Uber, you have to give the federal government whatever X percentage of your annual revenue so that we can maintain the roads that your cars use. And that sounds like a really interesting, innovative idea, but in practice, like nobody would ever do that.
Interesting. So Kyle brought this up this morning before we hooked up with you, and you may want to ask this. Did you want to ask about boring and how it plays into this?
Yeah, my mind jumps to that. I was thinking about it too when you were talking about Austin and how they're potentially adding layers above, and obviously this whole conversation is ripe for disruption if we start going below the ground and make the system more three-dimensional. But do you feel like that's going to fall into the same trap as just expanding the lane count, or do you think this is something that could indeed revolutionize public transportation?
Yeah, so it is a complete farce.
Strong.
You heard it here, folks. Yeah, so you're saying Elon Musk's boring company is a farce, or the concept of going underneath, or explain that.
Three-dimensional travel, generally, as a fix to like 2020's traffic congestion problem is nonsensical, and there are many reasons for that. It basically boils down to Elon Musk not understanding transportation engineering and thinking he's smarter than all of the transportation engineers. And I should include now like 200 years of public transportation design and how to build subways underground. And if I will say this to give him some credit, if he did create a bunch of tunnels and put hyperloops in them that were designed essentially the same as like train cars, where you're putting physical people in small spaces,
densely packed.
Yes, and that would be better, and that may work. The problem is that, like with alternative energy technologies, it's way too early to figure out whether that would be more cost efficient than using 2020's best practices. And what he's done so far is dig tunnels and put individual cars through it. Like this is not a Bayesian statistical, space travel problem. This is like geometry. You need more people in fewer spaces.
Well, I think they have alluded to it in the past, and they had showed, in fact, mock-ups of the Hyperloop containing these pods that had density to them. So, I think what you're suggesting is maybe, it would be better for his cars, or he's thinking about that in terms of instead of like dense cabins. But I think conceptually, at least, the idea of being able to develop the tech of boring the hole without damaging the substrate is really what is, in my mind, what's really important right now. And then I think we have to put pressure. Maybe you're making a very good point here. Put pressure upon people that build vehicles, et cetera, to really bring to fruition something that can contain density as well, so that we can push these through.
It's I think, like, yeah, you can argue about engineering, and there are good arguments to have about that. And I am not at all a subsurface transportation expert. I don't know anything about digging holes. But other than, to lessen my point, the points I'm making, but the Elon Musk said, I forget to whom, but he said once that public transportation is undignified.
Interesting.
And
I don't know if I agree with that.
The problem in like transportation expert land is that Elon Musk and people, he doesn't change the paradigm of one human in one car size space, because that's the dignified way to travel, and that's the problem. You have to understand, like, and not be dismissive culturally of the things that people know.
I wonder if him referring to it as undignified is him bashing it as something that like he doesn't want to use because it's not dignified, or if he's just kind of saying that's how it's perceived, and therefore it's unrealistic to expect at least a certain subset of the population to take full advantage of it. You at least have the hurdle of changing that stigma. But I don't know.
The biggest, no, absolutely, and I want to go on that point for a second because it's really important. The public bus transportation, it has been in a crisis the past 5 years or so with declining ridership, like 7-8% year on year, sometimes double digits. Wow. In a place like New York City, a lot of that boils down to the bus service being bad. There's not enough dedicated space for buses, so the buses go slower. The bottom line being, people don't think public transportation is undignified. The bus just has started to suck more.
Yeah.
In a place like Los Angeles, which is legitimately investing smartly in public transportation on rail, the challenge is that it's 80-20 in terms of bad perception. There are lots and lots of people, especially if you're talking about fixed rail, that LA is expanding to LAX, to the beach in Santa Monica. So many car trips could be taken. You could take like an hour-long subway ride, and it is just that poor people ride the subway, homeless people ride the subway, and different ethnicities.
Yeah. Well, I say this, that I don't necessarily, like, if Elon Musk is indeed saying that that's not dignified, or you need to this isn't what we should do or whatnot, that's not good. But I will say this: I am in the camp that believes that none of this we can measure. Like, we could come up with solutions today that are probably far superior than just making a bunch of electric cars, no doubt about it. But the economies don't work that way. You have to get people interested in things before you can really make big change. And by that I mean, like, I don't know that he really wants to build a goddamn pickup truck. I don't know that he does. But I think he wants to get people really excited about buying them, so that we can convert. Because what happens, it's just like putting solar on your home. It's not what you expect. If you're lucky enough to be able to put solar on your home, you suddenly start developing awareness. And I think that a similar dynamic will exist if you get butts in cars or asses in seats, basically, whether they be in public transport that is done better than it currently is, or if you get somebody that lives in a rural environment that drives an F-250 at 8 miles per gallon into a Cybertruck or a Rivian or something like that. Those aren't perfect solutions. And I think that's what we need to at least one way we need to look at things is that nobody is purporting a perfect solution. What we're doing is getting solutions together with really smart people, and we're driving awareness. Because once people are, I hate the phrase woke, or the word woke rather. But as you become aware, we set a trajectory for not only our nation but for this planet, and that's exciting. And that's inclusive of all of us. Every human, every species, everybody on this planet can get involved with that, regardless of where you come from. But we need to have awareness before we have anything, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, and people do not. So you're very correct, and I want to emphasize the point that private car buying is very much emotional and about cool factor, and which is where Tesla is obviously extremely superior. But purchasing an electric vehicle makes people more aware of transportation as their effect on the universe. They realize that, oh, I'm taking electricity to provide fuel here that has to come from somewhere else. It can come from the sun for free in the long term. And the making people connect the car with the energy, with the sun, with the climate, that really only starts when electricity becomes a part of the car, because right now people do not connect pumping gas with hydraulic fracking, with the oil tankers in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
So what I hear, what I see, and what you just sort of said is that Elon's got his one. He's just one guy. He's one guy, and he has had a disproportionate influence on the way a lot of industry is moving. So, but he did that by creating, like, electric cars are not new. In fact, you can go back 100 years, but even in their first attempts in earnest in the 70s for the oil crisis, they were not sexy. So they appealed to absolutely no one. So he has to be a bit of a showman in a sense to capture an audience. If you create something provocative, I don't see that as a perfect solution, but god damn, he's getting a lot of people to think and act on. And that's the start of the conversation. He's changed industry by way of creating a conversation. It's not perfect, but man, it's gotten me involved. It's gotten Kyle involved. Yeah. You're involved.
Human nature is just a part of the equation, whether we like it or not. So if you want to ignore it, you're not going to succeed, and totally. you have to address it. But Gordon, if I could, before we run out of time, there's something I saw in your newsletter that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to pick your brain on it. And it was you had an article, and it was talking about, I think you called it like the donut hole of safety and autonomous driving. Yeah. And I'm guessing it kind of relates to. I would imagine you're of the opinion that there should be maybe some more driver monitoring in place. Would you agree with that, or can you riff on that a little bit?
Yeah. So the argument I made in that article is that the current generation of advanced driver assistance safety features, it's called ADAS. There are lots of acronyms in this conversation, but essentially like emergency braking and adaptive cruise control, and there are several others. They create an effect where it becomes harder to pay attention to driving. Essentially, when the car is analog, so to speak, and you are driving, and this is true, by the way, too, when you like devolve back down to stick shift, you're driving, your entire mind and body is participating in controlling this device, and which is fast and dangerous. When you go further away from doing that, it becomes more physically taxing on your brain to maintain total awareness. So on some sort of spectrum or a distribution, being totally in control is safe, or it's at least it's easy to be in focus. If the car drives itself perfectly, then you don't have to pay any control, and all of your focus can be on something else. The middle of that distribution is where it is most mentally taxing to stay focused. And I believe that this phenomenon has been borne out by some of the Tesla autopilot crashes where, and I'm not a huge militant person about the branding of autopilot, but people are not good at trying at like being totally 100% in focus, but not controlling anything. And so there's that.
There's a chasm right now.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So funny enough, in aviation, I was an airline pilot for many years, and we phrased this automation dependence. And so we go back a few decades, and we had a sort of an instrument cluster that we would have to part of our training and ongoing training and testing, et cetera, revolves around maintaining this awareness, this scan. Well, so a lot of things started occurring, 80s on, automation type things to make it easier to either supplant information onto one device, like multiple pieces of information on one device, as opposed to having to scan around for all these things. Different systems that could fly the aircraft through different regimes rather than just like today's, like cruise control on a car would be like the best example. It doesn't really do much other than hold your speed. But
right.
Like full automation does everything, right? It accelerates, decelerates, brakes, turns, etc. So we have that sort of automation in aviation. And where automation dependency comes in is this: the aircraft can be doing things that you don't want it to do, and you need to be aware of that. So but it's overcomeable by driving habits that keep you engaged. But because here's the reason why: the automation actually is great because it can, if done right, allow us to be even safer. And that's the goal, I think, obviously, of automation, as it relates to cars. But the automation allows me to pull back and not be focused on one instrument. As it relates to flying, I can pull back and I can be thinking about weather, and I can talk about air traffic control. I can be communicating with my colleague, but I also have to come in and out of engagement. And I suspect that's probably where we'll end up with this. I don't see full autonomy, like as in nobody in the car driving it, passenger in the back for a minute. I think it'll happen, but there's a long way to go, regardless of who says what, until we learn how to create that in and out awareness, being in control of the vehicle at all times, but then being able to step back and think a little more holistically, get more data given to you to provide wisdom on how to drive.
To dive into that point or emphasize even more, my brother is a Navy pilot. He flies P-8s, which are 737s and the way that an airplane pilot is in control of that vehicle is much different than the way that 99% of humans drive. And the challenge, and my brother said, I don't know if this is outside the military because they have all their acronyms, but he said you always have to care about your SA, which is situational awareness. And so, and this is, by the way, also how you are taught if you take like urban cycling classes or motorcycle riding classes. You're taught to scan the field, to look at the instruments you have. And so driving would become, as you said, a constant scanning of information, a collaborative experience with the automation systems.
Exactly.
Not a stepping back like as some of the concept cars have shown, where you're literally in the back of a limousine.
Yeah, I definitely, and that will present all kinds of interesting opportunity, to be able to treat your commute as more of a business trip. There will be some level of participation in you in working with that vehicle, but that opening up of your vision will allow you to do other things. And it's going to be that training, I think, is maybe what we're identifying here, is that training to scan, that situational awareness that's really going to drive safety.
I saw an interview with George Hotz. He's the CEO of Comma AI, and they have like an aftermarket system that is run on a smartphone, basically, that's modified. And his solution to this, I thought, was pretty elegant. He just put a front-facing infrared camera so that he could see the face at night as well. Wow. And if the phone sees that you're not focused on the road, it'll give you an alert, and then it'll disengage the system eventually. The driver monitoring problem, I think, seems like pretty easy to solve, but maybe I'm naive in some way.
No, it's by the way, I have more time if you guys want to go a little bit longer. The problem is that it's really creepy to have a camera following you constantly.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier, so much of car buying in the current culture, and intentionally so, since like the Mad Men era, it's about being cool and, I mean, not being creepy for sure. And so the Cadillac has the eye monitoring with Super Cruise. You have the eyesight with Subaru. They have the driver facing camera. And it's one of those things where we are going to see if people are kind of cool with that trade-off. Are you okay with having this camera on me 24/7 so that I can, be able to take my hand off the wheel for a little bit?
Well, and another thing that comes to mind here too is, I know right now when autopilot is engaged, statistics show you're like 8 times safer than just driving manually. So the fact of the matter is, like, even if this is a problem on net, it's still safer, even though this problem may exist in a Tesla that doesn't use driver monitoring other than the wheel weight thing. Are we just splitting hairs here? Is this something that we shouldn't be getting worried about if we're safer anyway?
Well, so welcome to the Department of Splitting Hairs. Lots of people live here. And studies like the one you just cited are argued about ad infinitum. So every January, there's something called the Transportation Research Board Annual Conference. These very, very smart academics from all around the world at different colleges and in different research groups come and present research that does have data and leads to conclusions like that. The challenge, though, is that culturally, we are not alarmed as an American society by traffic death. So if you look at historical traffic deaths in the United States, and you look at the major reductions in raw numbers and in the rates adjusted variously, the gaps in deaths are related to specific device changes or infrastructure changes. Obviously, mandatory seatbelt laws were huge, and it's maybe the best single policy decision point that inflected that graph. However, the per vehicle mile traveled and per 1,000 people rates have stabilized, and for the past 10 years or so are just flat. And so as in the number in America tends to be somewhere between 35 and 42,000 traffic deaths a year. And the challenge is that you might be right that we're splitting hairs, but the greater societal challenge is that we don't really care about reducing traffic deaths, at least not enough that it's on the same level as a movement like Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Certainly this automation, this is poignant because right now, unlike 10 years ago, there hasn't been any inflection point because we haven't had autonomous cars. So now we're getting people to actually think, I'm going to be in the back of this vehicle or wherever in this vehicle, but I'm not going to be driving it, and there's not going to be anybody driving. It's going to be this thing. in order to get there, we're going to have to make these incremental steps. One of them is going to like the what you guys are talking about in terms of like the camera on the face. I bet there's other types of sensors that can replace a camera, so people aren't fearful of their data being, people seeing them picking their nose on the somewhere on the internet. But those things, like, they have to occur because people right now are already overriding like Tesla's. What they do is the weighted steering wheel, but you can stick an orange in there or a grapefruit or some shit and just fake the system. Yeah. But we need to get from point A to point B to point C, etc. And it's we're going to have to accept that certain things are going to need to be in place for us to build out the tech to get there. And face detection, that seems, things that you can't cheat on. Because we should all be looking at this like, well, why would I want to cheat on something that's trying to keep me safe right now?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself, but if they want to watch me do whatever weird shit I do while I'm driving, and then the trade-off for me is that I don't have to drive most of the time, fine. But maybe I'm alone in that. I don't know. I probably am.
Well, Gordon, maybe I speak for Kyle here. We like your higher level approach to this and thinking about humanity first, as opposed to markets and individual equipment. It's a refreshing attitude, and I applaud you for it.
Yes, sir.
I want to talk real briefly. We're going to mention it at the beginning of the show when we build the intro, but tell us real quick about Street Justice and where people can go to sign up, to subscribe, to be a part of that. Can you do that for us?
Yeah. So Street Justice was a news organization I started in 2018 because I had been laid off as a local journalist here in DC. And it was not the first time I had been laid off. And I knew that I wanted to be a transportation reporter. I knew that I knew transportation policy from academic training and work experience. And so I just started this newsletter. And so I'm part of this wave of paid newsletter business type things. I have grown it consistently over the past 15, 18 months. And so I do that. It's my main source of income, which is a statement about how little income I make, not about how much time I spend on it. The
name of it's badass, by the way. Street Justice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. It's and so my goal for Street Justice is to hopefully soon have a sustainable living wage for myself where this is the only thing I do. And I don't envision a world empire. I don't envision News Corp. I just want to do really, really good local and occasionally national news about the built environment. So that is transportation infrastructure, that's energy, that is planes, which I'm learning more about, and underwater things. I do not know how submarines work. So that's the goal. If you live in the Washington, D.C. area and you care about these things, our website is streetjustice.news. You can subscribe any different price between $5 and $10 a month for all of our editions on Patreon. And you can donate to us by us being me. You can donate so that I can have $5 for a transit fare.
Right on.
And you can do that. And it's the way I want to bring it down too is that I did talk a lot in this conversation about high level things and big hairy problems, but I fundamentally focus on the block where change is happening, on your neighborhood, and things are always changing, and there's lots of reasons and equities and justice angles there. And so that's what I do. And my only bias is that I am partial to the facts. And so I'm not NPR. I'm not going to give discredited people credit. And this is, I'm not in this to get rich. This is just trying to be a public servant journalist.
So if you do reach a threshold where you become rich, can we be in your downline to catch off those offcastings there? Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure. You guys, well, you'll become part of the Street Justice Podcast Network.
Okay.
Right on.
Hey.
We dig that. I want to say one last thing. I know your street justice is DC centric, but I, as someone who does not live in DC, gleaned a lot of useful information, just in general from it. So, is it safe to say that you know eyeballs from all over the country and other countries can check out your street justice?
Yes, I do 4 newsletters a week. I try to do 1 DC, 1 Maryland, 1 Virginia, and the weekly Sunday slot that's for all subscribers, for free subscribers, that tends to be for a national trend type phenomenon.
Right on. Well, Gordon, we are extremely appreciative of you taking your
Sure.
your time and spending a little bit with us. It's been fun, and we can't wait to have you back after your empire is all settled.
Thank you, Gordon.
Sure.
All right, take care, Gordon.
Thank you very much.